What's up guys, what's going on? Thanks for checking out this video. I'm back on my YouTube channel, fired up for this video. We all want sports content. I'm here to give it to you. College football talk today. The top 10 teams most impacted by the coronavirus. Let's dive into it.
So a nice job again by Max Brown.
Max Brown, you're making it look easy.
Being very careful with the right arm.
It all comes down to self-awareness and perspective.
Spring ball's canceled. No team is getting their 15 practices that they're usually accustomed to getting, and it's not going to impact all teams equally. If you got a team that's returning a lot of starters, if you have all your coordinators coming back, it's not as big of a deal. But nevertheless, the top 10 teams most impacted by the coronavirus. Starting at number 10 is the Missouri Tigers, one of a few SEC teams on this list. The reason why they're on this list is quite simple. It's a change in regime. Barry Odom out, Eli Drinkwitz in. He's an innovative offensive mind, but with that innovative offensive mind, you need practices to install your system. He's got a quarterback battle on his hands, and he does not return a lot of production. Missouri's ranked 100 nationally in terms of production coming back. Gotta find an answer at quarterback. They're my number 10 team most impacted. The team coming in at number 9 is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Head coach, the Pirate. Does that work now? Now that he's not on the Palouse, does that count? Anyways, they're the number 9 team most impacted by the coronavirus. Why? It's quite simple. You got Mike Leach coming to town, which means your entire cultural belief system has changed with the air raid coming to town. You need time to install that offense. They could have used 15 spring ball practices, but it's not just an offensive thing. When you're running the air raid, it's a cultural shift. And if we're being honest, we saw this in the news a week or so ago as Mississippi State had an offensive lineman transfer because of statements Mike Leach made. Just imagine being in Zoom meetings like a lot of these players and coaches are going through with Mike Leach. Love his antics, big fan of Mike Leach. But if I'm a player that's just getting to know my new head coach and I have to do it over Zoom with Mike Leach, he's a tad quirky. Love his offensive mind, think it was a slam dunk hire for Mississippi State. But how does that fit? I don't know. I don't think any of us know unless we're in those Zoom meetings. So establishing a culture during that time could be tough for Mike Leach. So that's reason number 2. And the third reason is production. I mentioned Missouri's 100th in the country in production returning. Well, Mississippi State is 110th. I will say it's a little skewed because that rating system is saying, hey, Mississippi State doesn't have their quarterback returning, but Mississippi State got the best free agent acquisition this offseason in quarterback KJ Costello coming from Stanford. If you've watched my previous content, you know I'm very high on KJ Costello. I think the transition to the air raid is going to be super smooth for KJ Costello. He's that good. He gives Mississippi State's offense some stability. They already have one of the best running backs in the country returning. It'll be interesting to see how install is impacted, if it is, with having no spring ball for Mississippi State. But I think KJ Costello is a huge move for Mississippi State. It's why they're only 9, and they very well could be higher, and they would be higher if they didn't have KJ Costello. But there we go. There's the number 9 team, Mississippi State Bulldogs. 2 SEC teams so far, and we're gonna get a third one right here as Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss squad is coming in at number 8. I netted out with Ole Miss at 8 because it just feels like there's a lot of positive energy around that program. I just think the corona cancellations, I guess is what I'll call it, kind of puts a roadblock to that momentum. If you're Lane Kiffin, you want to build off this momentum, you want to get into spring ball, evaluate your roster, and kind of be able to keep trekking along. My worry is if you're Ole Miss, you have all your kids go home. Yes, everyone in the country has their kids go home, but Ole Miss is building off some positive momentum. That roadblock isn't as significant for these teams that don't have that momentum build. So that's the main reason I have Ole Miss at number 8. The second main reason is Ole Miss has an absolute gauntlet of a schedule early on. They have Baylor, a cupcake, then they go Auburn, LSU, Alabama. That's a joke. But they're going to be projected to be 1-4 at best, in my opinion, early on. And that's not the start you want if you're Lane Kiffin. And I know he's going to have somewhat of a pass because of all those teams he's playing, but it doesn't make it any easier. And if you're a new coach, you really could have used that spring to kind of sort out their roster just so they're not cramming everything into fall camp, having to get ready for an absolute gauntlet. And the third reason they're at number 8 is they also have a quarterback competition between Matt Corral and John Rice Plumlee. With Plumlee, I'm not sure if he would have participated in spring. You guys will have to fact check me on that. But either way, if you're Lane Kiffin and this offensive staff, you want those 15 spring ball practices to say, hey, is Matt Corral our guy? Do we think he's our guy? And provide some sort of clarity before having to figure out all of this in fall camp. Momentum, new staff, gauntlet of a schedule, and quarterback competition put Ole Miss at number 8. Oh, and I'll add one more. The reason why they're ahead of Mississippi State is I don't think it's as critical for Mike Leach to have a ton of success in year one. I think he can survive just fine by not having the best year one. If Lane Kiffin comes in year one and they totally flop, and let's say some of these other bottom tier SEC teams do very well, or not even very well, just solid, I just think Ole Miss, the leash isn't as long as it is for a Mike Leach. Leash, that's funny. But that's why I need to get it done. Number 7, we're switching conferences, going to the other side of the country. We are going to the Pac-12. Number 17 most impacted by coronavirus, the Washington Huskies. There should be no surprise. You talk about new head coach. Yes, I know he's from the same Chris Peterson tree. Lose your quarterback early to the NFL draft, and I know a lot of people were expecting Eason to leave. I thought he should come back. He did not. 2 teams ago, I mentioned KJ Costello. This Washington team made a heavy push for KJ Costello, did not get him. But that shows me one thing. That shows me that they are not rock solid in their current quarterback situation, which means they could have used a spring ball to get more clarity to see if Jacob Sirmon or Dylan Morris could get the job done long term. No spring ball means you don't get to know that. There's no on-field reps, so they're gonna have to wait till fall or this summer to make a business decision and say, hey, do we go into the transfer market and try to get someone who's out there, something that happened in the spring, let's go get a different guy? Or do we roll with the hometown kids, both Dylan Morris and Jacob Sirmon, hometown guys? Do we trust the way we're developing our guys and we're gonna go with one of them? They lose a lot on offense. The 3 most important positions on the offensive line, center and the 2 tackles. The new coordinator and John Donovan having to install a new system. Yes, it's less complex, which a lot of Husky fans are excited about. And then having to find your answer at quarterback. Oh, by the way, you have a new head coach. And let's take a step back. Similarly to what I was saying about Ole Miss, where they need to kind of take advantage of year one, Washington needs to do the same thing, because you've got Oregon, which is really kind of taking control of the Pac-12 as of late, especially on the recruiting trails. And while we haven't seen the total benefits of the recruiting trail as of yet, you better believe we'll see that in the coming years, the result of those successful recruiting classes. Washington can't fall back. They were the premier team when I was in the Pac-12 late in 2016-17. They have a mediocre 2019. If they have another mediocre 2020, Oregon steps up. Stanford's not going to be dormant for so long. Cal's program's kind of right there. Not to mention Arizona State, USC, it's only a matter of time before they get back. Washington can't have a dud year in year one for Jimmy Lake. They did not have a great year in year one for Chris Peterson, and that's the point I'm trying to make. They gotta find an answer at quarterback. They gotta install their offensive system. So the Washington Huskies are my number 8 team most impacted by this coronavirus. Coming in at number 6, this might be the biggest surprise of the list. All these teams so far, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's kind of made sense, right? No surprise. Well, at number 6, I'm going to the defending national champions, the LSU Tigers. Why that? They're sitting pretty, right? National champions, got Eddie O, coach of the year, programs where they want to be. So why LSU at 6? They had 9 juniors declare for the draft. And in terms of that production rating that I've referenced a couple times, they are 127th in the country. That is like literally at the bottom in terms of production returning. Joe Burrow, maybe the best season in college football quarterbacking history. He's gone. Joe Brady's gone. 2 new coordinators in, which I love these hires. You got Bo Pelini coming from Youngstown State. I played him myself in 2017. From LSU, I'm excited about that hire. And then pass game coordinator, Scott Linehan. Gonna be honest, don't know the ins and outs of his style. I just know he's been in the NFL a bunch. I've known that name since I was a little kid watching football. But anytime you lose 9 guys that declare early, and oh, by the way, you lose 4 out of 5 starters on the offensive line, that's a big deal. Spring ball is a great opportunity to kind of sort out guys on the offensive front. If you're gonna count on young guys to develop and be your answer across the offensive front, you need spring ball to figure it out. It's concerning on my end if you're jumping into fall camp and that's the first time in 8 months that you've put on pads and you're asking offensive linemen to sort it out. That's concerning for me. And not to mention, similar to Washington, I don't think LSU can afford to just kind of have a good year. I think they need to have a great year because you don't want the Floridas, the Georgias, and the Alabamas to get even more traction. Oh, not to mention any of these other SEC teams that could potentially hop up in there. You don't want any of those teams to get traction. LSU, they need to be great just to keep this momentum. This spring ball would have been very beneficial to develop young guys, continue that momentum, and Just allow Eddie O to do his thing and build the program that he's been building. The number 5 team, we're staying in the SEC again, and I promise I'm almost done with SEC teams. I think I am, right? Yeah, I'm slowing up on SEC teams. But number 5 is Derek Mason's Vanderbilt squad. I don't know if this is gonna be surprising for you guys, but here's where I'm at. Anytime you keep your head coach, but fire the coordinators, you better believe that's a red flag. It was a red flag last year with USC and Clay Helton. It's a red flag this year with Texas. We'll see if they're on this list. But anytime you're Derek Mason in year 7, and you fire both your coordinators, it's make or break time. It is make or break time. Going back and looking at his tenure at Vanderbilt, I know Vanderbilt's not some illustrious SEC team, but they've never had a winning season. That's kind of crazy when you talk about a coach in their 7th season never having a winning season. He's had 2 6-6 campaigns where they lost their bowl game and finished the year losing, so I guess I gotta put an asterisk against that a little bit. Having 2 new coordinators, trying to establish a new identity with your program, you could have used spring ball for that. They don't have an answer at the quarterback position right now. They only have 2 scholarship guys on their roster. If you make this list, a lot of these teams don't have an answer at quarterback. Vanderbilt's certainly one of them. And they are 122nd in the country in offensive production returning. It is a lot easier to replace defensive production than it is offense. The last 5 teams on this list, their coaches are not at risk of getting fired after this season. Derek Mason, he's on the hot seat. That's just the reality of his circumstance. So these 15 practices that he's missing out on as a result of not having spring ball are paramount. And while he might have an advantage in terms of these Zoom meetings dealing with players because he already has a relationship with these guys, the reality is this 2020 season is paramount for him. My number 4 team is the Baylor Bears. I just referenced LSU. Losing their defensive coordinator, well, where'd he go? He went over to Baylor. The surprise of Baylor at 4 might be just the fact that they're this high. I think we can all be in agreement that they're on this list, but why are they this high? It's a little bit of the pressure element that I've alluded to in a different respect, but I've alluded to it with Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. But with Baylor, Dave Aranda, he's inherited a top 10 football team. The standard is high. And so I think there is some pressure for him to make moves year 1, or at least get close to that standard. I don't think it's realistic for Baylor to be a top 10 team every single year, but I don't think Dave Aranda can afford to flop on year 1 or just have an average year. 1, because of where the culture's at, but 2, because of the other teams in the Big 12 and what they're looking like in 2020. Texas, Sam Ehlinger. I know they got new offensive coordinators. I know Texas's 2019 year didn't go according to plan. Well, anytime you have a quarterback like Sam Ehlinger coming back with the production he has, Texas is going to be looking to make moves. Spencer Rattler, assuming he's the guy at Oklahoma, they're not going anywhere in the Big 12. You got Iowa State with Brock Purdy. You got Matt Campbell, a great head coach. You got an experienced signal caller that I love in Brock Purdy. You better believe Iowa State's looking to make moves. And then Oklahoma State. Feels like they're everyone's darling, not only the Big 12, but nationally. They're everyone's kind of dark horse college football playoff team. I just listed 4 teams right there that Baylor's going to have to fight with for a conference title. It's going to be tough. And I think anytime you're a new head coach, let me stop there. Anytime you're a new head coach, you're immediately highlighted to be on this list because you have to come in, establish the culture for your team, and imagine doing that with no practices, with Zoom calls instead of in-person meetings, not being able to connect with your players like this. So all these teams that have new coaches, you better believe that's the main reason why they're on this list. And Baylor's no different. Production, they're not very high. They returned Charlie Brewer, their quarterback, but they are 108th in the country in production returning, which means like a lot of these teams could have used spring ball to find some answers. So yeah, new head coach in Dave Aranda, coming with new coordinators, lack of production returning, and the fact that I think pressure is higher for this Baylor team to have success in year 1 than it is for other teams. Not because of what conference they play in or how strong their fan base is, but just for the longevity of their program. When you talk about where Oklahoma State's at, Oklahoma, Texas, Iowa State, Baylor can't slip, and they need to have a solid year 1, so that's why Baylor is my number 4 team. My number 3 team is another team led by a new head coach, and that's the Florida State Seminoles. Mike Norvell heard nothing but great things about him, but just like I've said before, anytime you're a new head coach, establishing your culture with no spring ball is very difficult, and I think it's even more difficult when you talk about a team like Florida State. Let's call a spade here. You're getting a lot of 4- and 5-star guys. You had 41 consecutive winning seasons before having 2 losing seasons as of late. You better believe the noise in those kids' ears is as loud as it's ever been at Florida State. A lot of those kids in that locker room are getting some flack. Therefore, when they're not in that locker room and they're not under Norvell's watch and they have all that noise at their individual homes and these team meetings are going on over Zoom, I don't envy Mike Norvell having to go through that scenario. I lived it firsthand at SC when we were not where we wanted to be. Chatter starts going on. I'm sure that chatter is very loud for that locker room. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. They have great leaders in that team. I could very well be wrong, but that's just from having lived it a little bit. I would not be surprised if that's the case. But that's not the only reason Florida State's on this list. They have a potential quarterback battle. James Blackman, now an upperclassman, strong arm, he's got a slight build. I think he's their guy. I think they think he's their guy. I'm not sure. I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but spring ball would have added clarity to that quarterback competition. The bright spot here for Florida State is they do return 63% of production on offense and 83% on defense, so that's a great sign. You have some guys that have had some reps, so losing that spring ball is not as detrimental in that way. It is tough in the fact you're bringing in new systems, but these guys have played ball and they've seen real life bullets, so that's an advantage. Another main reason Florida State's on this list is similar to what I was saying about Washington. When you look at the ACC, Clemson is the standard and no one's close. But if you're a Florida State fan, you'd like to think in a couple years they should be that clear-cut number 2 team in an ACC where that's the message every single team's saying is, hey, we got to get to that point. We got to get to the point where we're challenging Clemson. When you look in state too with Florida State, Miami's saying that same message. Miami also could very well be on this list. Spoiler alert, they're not on this list. And so Florida State can't afford one of these other teams to get traction. A Miami in state. They can't afford to wait a couple years and see if Florida becomes a national powerhouse, because Florida, they're right there. In Florida State, they've got to make moves. They need to get some positive vibes back in their program, start righting this ship so they're competing nationally. And I know it's not going to happen overnight, but that's why they're this high on this list. Is they need to take a significant step in 2020. It's hard to do that with a new program with no spring ball. Only 2 spots left, and if you're a college football junkie, if you sit there and think about it a little bit, you probably can identify which 2 teams are left. At number 2, I'm going with the Michigan State Spartans. And for a lot of the same reasons we've already heard, except with Michigan State, they're just elevated that much more. New head coach in Mel Tucker, hired in mid-February, puts Michigan State behind the 8 ball. I know when I played mid-February, winter conditioning's 2/3 of the way done, and that's how you lay the groundwork for your program. So Michigan State's already behind the 8 ball with Mel Tucker. They lose out on spring ball, in which he's not able to install his system. He's not able to establish that personal connection as much in terms of getting to know his guys. I mean, yes, you can do it over Zoom, but it's just harder. It's just the human element to that. And once again, Michigan State does not bode well in the production returning category. They are 117th in the country in production returning and 122nd in the country in offensive production returning. A big reason why that's the case is Brian Lewerke's gone. Michigan State's got to find an answer there. They do not have guys with experience. I do think an element that is helping Michigan State is Michigan State has some blue-collar kids. When you talk about establishing a culture, the culture at Michigan State, Mark D'Antonio, he established the culture. A lot of these teams that have new coaches is because the culture wasn't where it needed to be and someone's got to elevate that. Well, Mark D'Antonio, he retired. It wasn't because they were losing a bunch of games, and I know they want to get back to where they were in 2016. I think it was 2016 when Michigan State and Connor Cook were in the playoff. That's where Michigan State is trying to get back to. But I say all that just because I don't think the culture Mel Tucker is inheriting is in total disarray, like it is at some of these other programs. So Michigan State, why are they number 2? New head coach behind the 8 ball. Hired mid-February, super tough. Number 2, lack of production returning, especially offensively and especially at the quarterback position. Maybe they're in the grad transfer market. Not so sure. Michigan State's always going to lean on the run game, but you win games with quarterbacks. You got to find your answer there. And number 3, you have 2 new coordinators coming in as well. And yes, it won't be as drastic of a shift as it is at, say, Mississippi State with Mike Leach coming in with the air raid, but you have Scotty Hazelton coming in from K-State. You have Jay Johnson coming with Mel Tucker from Colorado to Michigan State. So familiarity's there a little bit, which is a good sign if you're a Spartan fan, but it's 2 new coordinators. You could have used those spring ball reps to install your programs, the nuances of offense and defense. You don't have that, and so that's why Mel Tucker and the Michigan State Spartans are my number 2 team. And my number 1 team, this was the easiest one. Slotting 2 through 10 was a little bit of tough, or I guess more so 3 through 10 was tough. You could have kind of sorted any of those teams around, but to me, the clear-cut number 1 team most impacted and was kind of the motivation of why I want to do this video is the Colorado Buffaloes. If I said Michigan State was behind the 8 ball, then compound that even further for Colorado. They hire Carl Durrell on February 23rd. I mentioned the winter conditioning thing. February 23rd, that's when, like, my playing days, that's when winter conditioning was already wrapped up. So you already had a section of your offseason done, solidified, in the bank, in the barn. Well, not at Colorado. know they were training, I know they were doing some stuff, but it's just different when you know the guy you're working for might not be your coach here in a little bit. If Mel Tucker was behind the 8 ball, Karl Dorrell's even more so behind the 8 ball. I did like what he did. He retained 4 coaches, which that's unheard of. At least to me in my college football knowledge, I would have done the same thing if I was Karl Dorrell. I think it was a smart move. It shows you just how far behind this Colorado team was. You need to lean on some of these old coaches and the relationships they had, and that's why I'm sure he brought a lot of those coaches back, which I guess that's good in the fact that you're having that camaraderie here in a time where you're not having the face-to-face interaction with players. But to me, it's a little bit of a red flag. There's a reason most coaches that come in fresh want to start fresh, because they want to turn the page. And Colorado didn't exactly do that. Once again, can't blame them. If I'm Dorrell, I'm doing the same exact thing. But the biggest thing when I reference these Zoom meetings and building relationships with these players is if you're a new head coach, you're a new coordinator, you want guys to buy in. Ed Orgeron's on this list. You better believe he has his guys bought in. This is not an issue for Ed Orgeron and LSU, but for all these other teams on this list, maybe outside of Jimmy Lake at Washington, I'd be willing to bet that his players are bought into who he is and the culture of what he's got going on. But everyone else, this buy-in issue, it's a lot harder to do over Zoom when a kid might be checking his phone on the side or something like that. Production-wise, Colorado is 115th in the country in production returning. They lose their starting quarterback in Steven Montez. They lose their all-everything receiver in Laviska Shenault. They lose a lot of production. Once again, spring ball could have added some clarity, could have allowed some guys to get some reps, get some experience under the belt. Spring ball, that's when you give every guy equal opportunity. But fall camp, these coaches are hired to win games. They can't wait around and have the freshman receiver get as many reps as the guy that they're counting on Saturdays to make plays. It just doesn't work like that. So a new head coach that's already starting behind every team in the country, paired with the fact that they don't have a lot of production returning, and by the way, the most important position in sports, quarterback, Colorado has no clear-cut answer there, and with no guy in that room with significant experience. So with all this in mind, that's why the Colorado Buffaloes are my #1 team most impacted by this Corona chaos. We're missing sports. I'm hoping this content gave you guys something to digest. Let me know if you agree, you disagree. I know I left some teams off. Front of mind teams I left off, Texas. The reason why Texas is not on this list for me is I love Sam Ehlinger. When you talk about all these teams that have to figure out answers depth chart wise, when you can walk into a season that does not have the extensive off season and know you have your established signal caller, I think that's a huge advantage for Texas, even if they do have new coordinators. Another team that could have made this list is the Michigan Wolverines. They lose a lot this off season. The reason they didn't make this list though, if you're Jim Harbaugh, you're not making crazy new changes culturally, right? It's another year. Not that you get stuck in the monotony, but right, guys are used to what's going on. Josh Gaddis is coming back. I just think in terms of top 10, they're sitting just on the outside. Boston College and Rutgers were not on this list. I just think their leash is longer. They don't need as big of a year one as a lot of these teams in the top 10. ASU is another team that I could have put on this list, similar to why I had Ole Miss on this list in terms of the momentum they've built. ASU's got a lot of momentum out west. The way they're recruiting, the coaches they're hiring, the young quarterback they have in Jaden Daniels. Yes, they might not be able to build off of that into spring ball, but they'll be just fine. They're gonna pick up where they left off. That's why ASU is not on this list in a good way. And the last team I thought about putting on this list is a team I cover a lot, the USC Trojans. That's where I played. It's a program I am very, very familiar with. The reason they're not on this list is very simple. I think they have the #2 offense returning in the country. #1's Clemson, #2 is USC. When you have all these teams across the country that need spring ball to find answers, USC has to find answers at both offensive tackles, but outside of that, they have a very, very good idea about their roster. Not to mention they have a ton of impact players banged up. While you always want reps, it allows those guys to get healthy. Yes, they have a new D coordinator, but like I said earlier in this video, I think that transition is easier to make. That's why USC is not on this list. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 teams most impacted by coronavirus and the cancellations and the craziness going on. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe, and share. And let's chop it up in the comments. You agree with how I rated them? Think I left someone out? Give me a comment. Love to dive into this with you guys. I'm looking forward to putting out more YouTube content and looking forward to seeing you next time.